Welcome everyone. My name's Karen Alexander. I'm the invasive species Policy Coordinator at the ISC. And I'm just going to give things a couple minutes for participants to trickle in. Go ahead and grab a coffee or take a couple minutes and we'll be right back to get started. Okay, hi everyone. I guess we'll get going a couple minutes after 11. I'll start that again for those who hadn't joined yet. My name is Karen Alexander. I'm the Invasive Species Policy Coordinator at the Invasive Species Center. And I welcome you today to an Invasive Species Center webinar series titled Controlling Invasive Phragmites, the Light at the End of the Tunnel. So just a couple housekeeping items before we get going. The audience is all muted and we ask you to please hold questions to the end. We'll certainly take as much time as we have to answer as many questions as we can. And if you like, you can use the Q&A function in your toolbar to type in your question as they come to you. And we'll go back through those questions at the Q&A period at the end. This is our first invasive species webinar series that is enabling closed captions. So if you're someone who would like to read along, go ahead and find that option in your toolbar. It'll say something like CC transcript or enable subtitles. You can click on that and turn that function on, or you could turn it off as well. Or you can once you have it on, you can move that toolbar or the way the words are describing or showing up on your screen, you can move that around and get it out of your way too. So new to our webinar series, and hope some find that useful. We'll move on to the webinar now, and I'd like to just introduce the Invasive Species Center as a nonprofit organization. We do work to connect stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the spread of invasive species that are harming Canada's environment, economy, and society. If you're someone who has an interest in invasive species and would like to stay connected to our work, stay up to date on interesting programs and opportunities to work with us, even advertisements on upcoming events and webinars, please go ahead and sign up to any of our mailing lists by visiting our website. And we look forward to staying connected to you. Today's webinar is about a significant threat to Ontario and Canada, the Phragmites australis. The Invasive Species Center is quite concerned about the potential impacts of this aggressive invasive perennial grass. We have two ongoing programs right now to address this species in Ontario. We are coordinating the Green Shovels Collaborative, which is an initiative of 6 different conservation groups in the province that are working together to develop an efficient and coordinated approach to deliver management and prevention of Phragmites in Ontario. And we're also investigating the potential role of conservation finance, which we hope and are looking forward to exploring its opportunity, or the opportunity of financing large expensive programs like Phragmites Control in the province. So I encourage you to look into those 2 programs. If you have interest, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you and work together on any of these initiatives. So now I'll move to introduce our guest speaker today, Janice Gilbert. Janice is a wetland ecologist, has a PhD from Ohio State University and over 25 years of experience. I met Janice about a decade ago when she mentored me on my first Phragmites project on the Lake Huron shore. And we've been friends and colleagues ever since. She's been working on Phragmites tirelessly the whole time. And it's my pleasure today to have Janice with us to talk about her work, her experiences, and take us through what's going on in the world of Phragmites. So I'll pass it over to Janice, and thanks again for joining us today. And I'll look forward to reconnecting with everyone during the Q&A.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Karen. And I will just start sharing my screen here. Everyone, the marvels of modern technology. I'm coming to you from, can you see my presentation? Sorry, I'm coming to you from south of Tillsonburg.
I can see it. You just need to put it in slideshow mode so it's full screen.
I did. I'll try that again. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you so much. Yes. And yeah, and welcome. And so when I was asked to give this presentation, I was saying, okay, who's my audience? And I think, I hope most of you today know a little bit about Phragmites, because I'm not going to be going into too much detail about the plant, like its morphology or anything like that, more of an overview of projects that I've been involved with. And the title really, what I want to convey by the time I'm done speaking is that there's a lot of hope with doing Phragmites work. And why I say that is, you know, in this in modern age with the threats of climate change, and just so much going on in the world, the threats to our natural environment, and we hear every day, you know, doom and gloom. You know, if we don't change things around really quickly, it can become really difficult to hear. And certainly those of us that are in the environmental field that want to restore and protect the natural environment, it can be difficult as well. Like I personally have seen wetlands just drying up because a lot of residential areas going in. So a lot of change in the hydrology and these systems, you know, these poor animals trying to eke out an existence in these small wetlands, and those are even being lost on the landscape, particularly with a lot of development that's going on in Southern Ontario. So it can be very disheartening to be in this field. But, you know, we, all of us, people that I get to work with, just have a lot of hope. And so that's what I want to convey, hopefully today, that there is hope. Mother Nature will heal if we give it a chance. So when I first started getting involved in Phragmites, I was actually assessing the wetland down Rondeau Provincial Park in 2005. I knew Phragmites was a problem, Eastern Seaboard in the States, because I learned in you know, my graduate studies down there as a problem. No one was talking about it as a problem on the Great Lakes, and it absolutely is. So as a wetland ecologist, I saw these massive stands of Phragmites in this coastal wetland, and I thought, oh my gosh, like we need to do something about this. And so that's what set me on this journey. And it certainly is a huge issue on the Great Lakes. These red dots indicate where it was recorded, and we see in Southern Ontario there's a lot of missing red dots. But I mean, it's been recognized as a significant issue on the Great Lakes, and we have now a binational group, the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative, that is has a great website, a wealth of information there, and trying, you know, working on both sides of the border to try and coordinate work being done. What makes Phragmites such an invasive plant is just the modes of spread that it has. So here's what we'll typically see this time of year, one of those feathery seed heads, and someone actually did a count with 2,000 seeds per seed head. They're not all viable, fortunately, and if those seeds stay in that head and don't land on moist sediment, they won't germinate. So their viability isn't really long, much like cattail. It would be there, you know, in seed banks for, you know, over 100 years. But if the seeds do land in water, they will germinate. And really neat project, a research project by Graham Half and Rebecca Rooney's lab at University of Waterloo. He had a prime growing conditions for these seedlings in a greenhouse, and one seedling produced 80 ramets within a short period of time. So they just show just even one of those, if it starts to germinate, it can start a colony. The other way it can spread is, particularly along the Great Lakes, where you have these massive wave energy events. It can rip out any established cells and redistribute any viable plant parts. So that would be the stems, for instance. If the stalks fall in the water, all along the nodes, they can resprout a root and a shoot and get established, or even the rhizomes, if they get ripped out of the ground, they can resprout on moist sediment. I liken this plant to like a zombie plant, because you think it's dead, it's not. So this is a pile of debris that had been ripped out by the ice, and then deposited on shore by wave energy, and you think it's all dead. No, there's some little sprouts starting again. So it's an amazing plant. So it has its own mechanisms for getting spread in the landscape once it's established. But humans really have been spreading it around quite a bit. There's a really good study came out in the 1990s. This was in the States, and so we didn't really know we had an invasive Phragmites on the landscape until the early 2000s, when Kristen Saltonstall did the genetic work and linked it back to the strains from Europe. So that's at that period of time when we knew we were dealing with an invasive strain, not the native Phragmites. But it's spread around from just construction work, like more and more disturbance of natural environments. More urbanization occurring, more nutrients on the landscape, and those hydrological changes, like the pulsing of our creeks and rivers now, that highs and lows that didn't used to happen, just because there's less natural area, like more pavement and whatnot, so that the rains don't get absorbed. A study out of Quebec a number of years ago made a direct link to the construction of transportation corridors and the spread of Phragmites throughout that province. And Karen mentioned, I first met her many years ago. She actually first started with her Frag work with the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation, and her first job was to map Phragmites along the Lake Huron shoreline from Sarnia to Waterton. It's quite an undertaking for her. But what she found was where there was new cells just starting along the lake shore, at the mouth of a creek or river, if she was to go up into the landscape, it was growing along a roadside ditch or an agricultural ditch. And so this is one of the main ways it's been spread throughout the province. Construction crews go in and do their work, and then they load the equipment on the flatbed, and off they go to the next site. They don't clean the vehicles off. And so not only is Phragmites being spread, but a lot of other invasive plants as well. So it's not uncommon to see Phragmites along our roadsides, certainly in southern Ontario and central Ontario. And what gives me a lot of hope is there's a lot of control programs going on, a lot of municipalities to reduce. In fact, this photo here, there's not too much Frag left now. This is down where I live in Norfolk County, and I'll talk about that program in a bit. But where I get really disheartened is when I travel into northern Ontario and I see it along our roads, particularly where it's beside a big wetland or a creek or a river, because I know exactly where that plant's going to be ending up. And it's going to be so much harder to get into those areas and deal with it. Mentioned a problem in the agricultural drainage ditches as a spread vector, but also it does cause issues for farmers. It does reduce the crop production and timing for when they can get on their land. So down my way again, this is not uncommon to see in some of these agricultural ditches, Phragmites blocking up the drains. This one here is one that gives me, I get so sad when I see this. It was really common when the lake levels were low, in the low period, and the lake levels are now dropping. So I'm hoping that this doesn't pick up again. But basically, recreationists with their ATVs, they just think it's their own little playground to go into these areas, and they don't understand the sensitivity of these areas, the rare plants and animals that are in there, but also too that they are spreading Phragmites into these sites by driving through Phragmites stands, and then it gets stuck on their vehicles and taking it further into these systems. So this is what's being lost. All this plant diversity, which is linked to the insect, which is linked to the animals that need to feed. So that really complex food web, because here comes in this plant, and it just makes it very, very, very monoculture and altered. As a wetland ecologist, I understand the impact certainly on the wetland system. I've seen it myself, particularly in systems where it's really isolated water, like you don't have open flows to the lake. So you have the pools of water, and these plants can really have an impact on the water that's in the systems at high evapotranspiration rates, and also the accumulation of the biomass. They just tend to dry these sites out. Also the impact on the nutrient cycling. A lot of our native plants will just break down year to year, and the nutrients get recycled, not so much with Phragmites. And I've done literally, it's got to be up in the thousands now, these square meter plots just for assessments. But basically, where the standing dead doesn't get ripped out by ice, so it's there year after year after year, you'll see a really high number in these square meter plots of standing dead. They just don't break down. But 69% of what's in your plot is standing dead, and then the 28% would be the live. It looks like a lot higher, but that's about what it is in these plots. And then usually along the edge, you'll get some other species like maybe jewelweed or hedge bineweed or cattail, nothing of great substance. The impacts on the wildlife are huge, particularly species at risk that need these wetlands for all or a portion of their life cycle. And we have found dead turtles in the Phragmites, so particularly blandings. They have that big hump shell. They get it into these large cells, and there's no water or food for them, and they just run out of energy and die. A lot of research now coming out of the impacts of Phragmites, one by Ryan Bolton back in 2010, just pure serendipity. He was looking at turtle nest hatch success down a Long Point, and where some of those nests had been overgrown by Phragmites, shading, so the temperature dropped in these nests, and also the humidity dropped, and so that the hatching success in those nests was actually very, very, very low. So something we never would have known. And a long-term data set by David Green looking at these endangered fowlers, for a portion of their life cycle, they need these vernal pools, and where the Phragmites had moved in, dried out the pools, and so a critical piece of this particular species life cycle. So as Phragmites increased in Long Point, these numbers just crashed of these species. More recently, studied out of Rebecca Rooney's lab by Courtney Robichaud for her PhD, and she actually spoke about a lot of this research at the first ever National Phragmites meeting that was held. And so there's actually some webinars out there from Courtney talking about this, but what she noticed was those aerial foraging birds were far less over the Phragmites stands than they were even over, the invasive cattail, and it just linked back to the population. Impacts on humans have been quite huge, particularly in areas where it's blocked the lakeshore access to water for recreational opportunities. So it's impacted areas that rely on those shorelines for tourism as well. People that own properties on the lakeshore had trouble selling their properties, and certainly had to sell at much reduced rates because there was no lake there to be able to access or enjoy. Damage to infrastructure certainly has been an issue, and fire hazards and blocked intersections have been horrific car crashes just because people couldn't see beyond the Phragmites. In fact, one group in St. Thomas used that fire hazard to get some uptake by the town council in St. Thomas, and as a result, they had a citywide, really successful program working together to eradicate it throughout the whole city. This was one photo that Murray Purcell used when he worked with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation to get his managers to pay attention to frag control. A lot cheaper, easier to control the Phragmites than to repair the damaged asphalt along the roads. A lot of my work deals in these really sensitive areas where we have a species at risk. And so, there's challenges for folks like myself that work on Phragmites and trying to, control the Phragmites without harming the species we're trying to protect. And so in some areas we have species at risk plants, not marigold trellis standing in amongst them there. We also have other desirable plants that we really want to keep on the landscape. We have some critters that are out and about trying to do what they do, pollinators. low and high density cells. We just don't treat all of those with the same method. Hard to reach, difficult terrain, high winds, and certainly these remote areas where not near roads or access points. And then also too, where it's growing, where people want to recreate and enjoy the lake and the water. We do have some really good control options out there, and I'm going to talk about these three in particular: the biological, mechanical, and chemical. And there is a revised invasive Phragmites BMP document that's come out through the Ontario Invasive Plant Council that's available to anyone. First off, it doesn't matter what method we choose, there are a number of factors to consider. Certainly the timing, because the wildlife will use the edges of even the dense stands for habitat. And so that's something that has to be, even if you're working a stormwater management pond or even along roads, the birds will nest in it. So basically some considerations of what are the goals of your project? Like, is it eradication? Is that a feasible goal? Or is it like dampening right down and then long-term maintenance? And then what are the most appropriate methods for achieving those goals? And then when should you be doing each of those methods? And then how do you actually know that you're doing more good than harm, like the timing aspect to it? And so that plays in, the monitoring piece is also very important in these projects. First, I want to just talk about the biological control. So this has been investigated for over a decade now, first in Bernd Blossie's lab. This is the lab that developed the purple loosestrife beetle, which is a really successful program on the Great Lakes. So they went over to Europe, looked at what was feeding on Phragmites in its natural environment, with Phragmites native. Then they came back to the States to see what insects were feeding on it in the US, mostly along the Atlantic seaboard, where it's been there the longest, since the 1800s. And they narrowed it down to these two moths. And Bernd gave a presentation on this Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative webinar a couple of years ago, if you want to listen to that and hear the history of it. But you can't just release these insects in the States and expect them to stay there. So there has to be some binational partnerships going on, and certainly we do have that with the University of Toronto and Agri-Food Canada. Michael McTavish is a lead scientist with this program going on in Ontario, and he gave an update at that National Phragmites Conference back in January. If you'd like to just go and Google that and listen to Michael's update, explaining where they are in the stage of the biocontrol and how that's going. It's a number of years off yet, but it's going to be one important tool. I like to mention the goats because every once in a while it gets some media attention. And this particular story came out. It was an old dump, and they brought these goats in the Phragmites in this dump. So it's certainly not a high value ecosystem. This was back in the early 2000s, and so I say, if you want to bring attention to in your community to Phragmites, put them in a pen by the side of the road in some frag or an area where it's not high value ecosystem. But this is not a viable method for controlling Phragmites. Just want to make that point from my humble perspective, anyway. These methods here anybody can use these tools, and a lot of fraggers out there in the landscape are using these tools: the spading, the cane cutting, and the still cutting. The spading method was developed by Lynn Short. She's a horticultural instructor at Humber College, and just an amazing program she has going on in Wimblewood Beach, where her family cottage is. So basically, it's a sharpened spade, and you slice off the stem below the sediment. You see she's working in sand, which sand and muck is great, rocky soil, and where you have a lot of other obstructions, not so much, but it's really a neat tool. Works really well in the water, particularly shallow water. These cane cutting tools, I learned about these from a really amazing group up in Oliphant. Lee Valley sells them, so I now have a program with Bruce Power, and they help offset the cost, and so you can buy them at Lee Valley. I think they're up around $28 now, and I have them available for $15. If you'd like to contact me, I certainly don't mind to provide them to your community group. The tool that's really handy that we use are these steel brush cutters. Here's a volunteer up in Oliphant purchased his own cutter and doing a slightly higher density cell, so he's not cutting native plants. Those other methods are great for working around native plants and just fine-tune cutting of sparse frag. But these brush cutters, they're not meant to go in the water, just so you know. But I have a couple that I've been using since 2015, and we still have them working. If you want information on how to keep them lubricated and what you should be doing, then I have a little information guide I don't mind to provide as well. And I'm going to actually have my mechanic do a little webinar or a little video for me to post on my website so folks learn how to maintain these. But they're really handy tool for cutting Phragmites in water. And basically the premise is you're cutting that stalk as close to the sediment as you possibly can. You see that little stubble there of cut Phragmites stalk. And if you have a spade, you can even slice that out. I started investigating this when I was doing work in Rondo back in 2007. Back in that time, though, the lake levels were really low, and I knew that it would work, but you had to be able to manipulate the water levels. And a lot of systems I was dealing with just had natural hydrology, just the pulsing of the Great Lakes. So when the lake levels popped up again in 2013, started swinging back to looking at this as an option because we did not have a water-safe herbicide available to us. And one of the first assessments I did was in this coastal wetland drive with the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group. And I set these plots out in an area I knew we were going to manually cut. And we had over 90% mortality after the first cut in water depths that are, just about half a meter and 100% mortality in even deeper water. And so here's a photo of what that site looked like before we did the cutting and then the next growing season after. So really, really successful control. And since that time, done a lot more investigation. And I now know it's not just water depth dependent that has a big factor, but it's also the water clarity. You can get 100% mortality in that chocolate milk type of water where it's really murky. But if you have really clear water, like up in Oliphant, where a meter and a half water depth, you still get the garden plant growing back. So there are some local factors that impact. I don't have much time to go into this, but I did give a webinar a couple of years ago for the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. If you want to learn more about these cutting to ground and how that works, the method, you can look at that one, that presentation. But at some point, these manual methods are. The frag's just too much for even that, because not only do you have to cut the Phragmites, you have to remove all of that cut biomass out of the water or it'll resprout. So in 2017 with partners Bruce Power, Greenstream, and the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group, I started this not-for-profit Invasive Phragmites Control Centre, and I knew about these machines over in Sweden, and I was able to get one and get it out to help remove the high biomass. We now have 3. It's just really incredible tools that allow us to help these groups out, get rid of the biomass. So it can cut the Phragmites, really thick Phragmites, and then it can actually pick it up as well. And I mentioned the timing aspect. We absolutely do not go into these systems before July 15th fish spawning regulations for one, but not only that, the birds will nest in the edges of the Phragmites, as I mentioned. And so we take a lot of care to try and reduce our impact on the wildlife where we work. And every single site, there's logistics to try and figure out, how we access and where the cut material is going to go and who we're working with, the volunteers, and lots of other factors. So here's, these are just images I took when I was working on the trucks a couple of years ago. Just what we're seeing. We even have to go through really nice habitat to get to the Phragmites sometimes. So just being aware of where the wildlife are. They actually don't care that you have a machine out there. They don't recognize it. It's a threat. The first time ever I got up close with a least bittern, which was pretty cool. All the years I've been out in the wetlands stomping around with my waders, and I happened to be on a machine, and there it is. And in fact, this one was nesting, so I stopped cutting and went back later. So yeah. It's kind of neat what we get to see out there working every day. The muskrats are funny. They actually like the Phragmites. It's like we're doing them a favor cutting, and they just crawl up on the raft and start munching away. So I mentioned the cut material, it will resprout. So we take great care to try and contain it in the areas we're working. Some places we put out these booms to try and keep it in the area we're working, or we'll leave a fringe out at the lakeside to contain it until we can get it all cleaned up. And some sites we're able to actually get the Phragmites out of the water and just put it right on shore. Once it's dry, it gets burned. In other areas, it makes more sense to make what I call these the giant muskrat dens. We can tuck the Phragmites in where it's not going to get washed out by wave energy. And the wildlife actually love these piles. They'll nest on it. This particular one saw a lot of snake skins on it. So it's nice and warm and dry on the top surface, and then underneath it's moist. So it's providing some nice habitat as well. Other areas, we don't have that option, so we have to get the biomass out. So we have a couple of rafts, and here's volunteers helping us load the rafts with the trucks. Up in Manitoulin Island, Judith Jones had to hire a barge, and the local township Takamaw, as in kind, provided their backhoe and trucks to just haul it away to the local landfill. This is our biggest project up in Oliphant. Local council member had a barge. He just brought it out. His son on a little backhoe, and a cottager donated a little backhoe in his barge to get the biomass out of that. So it's a real game changer for us. And the actual in-kind support from the town of South Bruce has been phenomenal. They have a backhoe operator on shore, and they unload the barges for us and then truck it away to the local landfill. So last year we took a lot of dump truck loads out of the Oliphant area. Just to mention, the town of South Bruce has been so supportive of their local Phragmites volunteers there, and they provide this bin free charge, and just sits on the shore, and then the cottagers can come and put the cut frag in the bin, and it gets hauled away for them. So here's an example of one of the first projects we worked on with the trucksters. This is at church camp up in Lake Huron, and before we did, this was their shoreline. Lake Huron is out there somewhere. They would have people come to check out the campground, and sometimes they left the campground. They were never over 70% capacity, just because that there was no lakefront to enjoy. They actually put a swimming pool in, and so we went in. We were able to spray the whatever's on dry land. They had a contractor come and spray, and then we cut out. And this was the first summer after we had removed the Phragmites. The campers were able to canoe. It was just so fantastic, and their whole shoreline now is being cleaned up. This is a partnership with the Lantern Shores Phragmites Community Group. This is a kind of a doppelganger, a similar situation. This is a campground area up on Lake Kincardine shoreline and Brucedale Conservation Area. So the campers, this was their beach for over a decade. So we did treat the Phragmites in the dry ground with herbicide, and then we actually started manually cutting 2015. And when that little opening out to the lake, there's campers with tears in their eyes. They hadn't seen the lake for years. They were so appreciative that we'd even opened up that much. But with the trucksters, we were able to just clear that whole embayment out, and it just looks like a difference today. And in fact, the campers now go and help just with fine-tune clearing out of any frag that restarts. I mentioned the chemical use, and it is actually a really important tool that we need to have available. We have a number of products, 3 in fact, with the glyphosate in the WeatherMax Timberline, WeatherMax Vision Max Weather Pro. That's the Bayer product, and then Timberline as well. And then we have an Imazapyr product as well. For a lot of these areas, we need what's called a letter of opinion, because they're not industrial sites or structural. They're natural areas. And so that's a permit from the Ministry of Natural Resources. That's the short form for that the agency now. Anyway, so yeah, so there's some considerations for using herbicide for sure. And I'm just so grateful that a lot of us are so grateful that the chemical company BASF have now got the approval from the Health Canada Pest Management Regulatory Agency for us to use their product, Habitat Aqua. So it's a water-safe product. It's been used in the States for several decades, and it's just going to be, it is a game changer for us. You do need an aquatic extermination permit to use that, by the way, and that's through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. And when I talk to people that aren't familiar with the herbicide use, they're really concerned that we're creating these these deserts, and that's not the case at all. This is an area where it's really thick frag we sprayed, and the next year here's the milkweed and coming back, and there's our little monarch as well. And I've seen this time and time again. As a wetland ecologist, I absolutely advocate the use of herbicides in certain areas using appropriate methods. Here's a really neat study, again, from Courtney Robichaud. She showed that in an area, this is down Long Point, the emergency use program has been underway, and I'm going to talk about that briefly in a bit. But basically, what this research showed was in the area where they used the aquatic safe herbicide to treat the Phragmites, the insect population next year, you see that treated bar, they were there, the insects were there, it didn't harm them. So that's a really fantastic data set to kind of alleviate the concerns people have with the use of herbicide. And basically, here's some more data from Courtney's research, just showing the types of insects that she was picking up in the area where they did use the herbicide. And again, there's a lot more information on this work from Courtney. So, how we apply the herbicide is really dependent on the density of the plants and access. So we use a lot of backpack spraying, walking through these sensitive areas to just target the frag. In some cases, we have a vehicle to get us in more higher density. We do have this amphibious unit. It's been retrofitted so we can cross water and then get to these. This thing will go anywhere, across beaver stumps, you name it. It's a pretty amazing machine. So we have that to access some sites. When I first started doing work in Ronfinch Park, was with this fellow here, Frank Letourneau, with Dover AgriServe. He has these retrofitted industrial Argos called Centaurs, and he put the platform up there and allowed him to access these areas. That machine can't go across water, but it certainly is able to access a lot of sites. And this is Eric Giles down in Long Point. Nature Conservancy of Canada has 2 of these marsh masters, and Eric has one. They're amphibious units as well, really handy for accessing remote areas, and with that spray units on them as well. I mentioned the emergency use program. For those of you that don't know about this, started back in 2016. Major partnerships down there, Nature Conservancy of Canada, Ducks Unlimited, Bird Studies Canada, Canadian Wildlife Service, private marsh owners, the county, Norfolk County, Ministry of Natural Resources. And basically, with that partnership, was the support for the Ministry of Natural Resources to go to the federal government, the Health Canada, to get a research and emergency use permit to allow them to use a product called Roundup Custom, just been used in the States for several decades. It's a water-safe herbicide. And basically, they were able to apply it from ground in helicopters. You see just tremendous amount of area down there that was just inundated with high-density Phragmites, really sensitive areas, lots of species at risk. And it's the first time this had happened in Canada, so exceedingly successful program. Part of the permit process was a lot of the research that had to be taken, and this was done by Dr. Rebecca Rooney, and that's where some of Courtney's work came out of. A lot of partnerships involved in this program. You see here on this, and this is actually a big sign that was put up down at Long Point, and it's timestamped. I took that photo looking out into the marsh before any work was done, and you can go and stand in front of that photo now, that sign, and see behind you the restored wetland system. It's just phenomenal how wonderful it looks down there right now. And this program not only is just focusing on the wetlands down Long Point, but throughout all of Norfolk County. It's taking a big community wide program, expanded it, and that's been led by Nature Conservancy of Canada. If you want to know more about this program, there's an update by Heather Braun. This webinar that was given for the National Phragmites Conference as well. So she's talking about the work at the Canadian Wildlife Service, but it's just a bit of an update on that whole program. I just wanted to mention that I'm just so blessed to be able to work, my crew, with these just amazing people that are out there in these communities that really care about protecting the natural environment where they live. And without them, a lot of these areas would still have Phragmites in them. This one here, the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group, chaired by Nancy Vidler, had the absolute privilege to be working with them for well over a decade now. And just the first group to actually take a watershed approach in their community to deal with Phragmites. And there's just a lot of amazing partnerships involved in that program. A lot of great work being done. I mentioned Lynn Short. She has this really neat baiting program on Wimblewood Beach, where summer students would work with her, and the private, the cottage owners and that would pay the kids cash to go work for the morning to get rid of the Phragmites on their property. And so as they're doing that, Lynn's teaching them about beach ecology and the importance of leaving the native plants there. And so just a really amazing program. There's a crew up in Kincardine, Kincardine Residents Against Phragmites, all along that shoreline. They took it on themselves to get a big community project going. We went and just helped them with the big cells, but they've been looking after everything else, and just an amazing group of volunteers there as well. Georgian Bay Forever, they have a Georgian Bay wide program going on, just absolutely phenomenal, and engaging all the cottage communities along that large coastline and getting programs together to assist with that. And in some cases they have achieved eradication. So just an ongoing program there. It's just been phenomenal. And I did mention earlier the Oliphant group, again, another amazing group of volunteers that we have the absolute privilege to work with, headed up by Leslie Wood. And the title of my presentation is Light at the End of the Tunnel. And when I first started working up in Oliphant, I remember standing on the government pier looking out into the sea of Phragmites out in that bay up in Oliphant. And there were some local guys standing there saying, I don't even know why they're bothering. Like, it's useless. Like, they're not gonna get rid of this plant. And I mean, that's the bay now. It's opening up. It's just so encouraging to see the work that's being done out there. And you have to be tenacious, you have to be positive, but it can be done. Here up in Manitoulin Island with Judith Jones working on projects there, she's got a crew that goes around to all of these remote areas all summer and deals with Phragmites, and we have the privilege to go and help her in some sites. And this is one shoreline at Blue Jay Creek, just all thick frag, and that was the year after, just minimal regrowth. And then this other group up in Sandridge, Lake Bernard, just volunteers to go around the lake and just clean up the frag. And apologies to those groups I'm not highlighting. There's a number of them out there that just doing phenomenal work, and just appreciative that you are. Karen mentioned the Green Shovels Collaborative, and this is another reason why there's light at the end of the tunnel. These partners, Invasive Species Centre, Ducks Unlimited Canada, Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association, Nature's Conservancy of Canada, Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, and the Ontario Turtle Conservation Center got together and went to the provincial government and said, we have shovel-ready projects that we can get going. This was in height of the COVID and all that was going on there, and so what's come out of that is great support from the province for Phragmites initiatives, and basically, getting a framework together for, what would province-wide Phragmites control look like? And part of that is a cost benefit. Now, what happens? It's going to cost if we don't do anything versus if we do. Some guiding documents that are just being developed with Nature Conservancy of Canada and a Northern Ontario strategy that we've been involved with, and just really delighted to be asked to be a part of that. And then also, as Karen mentioned, working on how to secure dedicated funding, like looking outside of the normal funding streams to try and support such a large undertaking. But I'm just so excited that this is getting going. And Nature Conservancy said, okay, our goal is to be frag free by 2033. I said, okay, that's awesome. Let's go. We'll see where we get. There's more information about this program. At Ontario Phragmites Working Group annual meeting, is information provided by Sarah Rang, the Executive Director of the Invasive Centre, Karen, Colin Casson, and Eric Cleveland of Nature Conservancy. If you want to learn more about this program, you can go and watch this presentation as well. I would also like to mention, for those that aren't aware, we do have an Ontario Phragmites Working Group. Anyone is welcome to join. We meet once a year. And there are presentations just to share information, what's going on in the province. We always ask for updates from the provincial government, particularly Ministry of Transportation, what's going on there, and with a lot of the research that's going on. We're always interested in the findings from the emergency use program and other great programs. So I welcome you if you're interested to join our group. And there's information on the website as well through the Invasive Plant Council. There are also a lot of products out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of the fragging communities groups out there have some documents, signage, whatever, help put together some of these pieces of information that's available to anybody. And this clean equipment protocol, it's getting more uptick now to get that heavy equipment clean before it goes to another site to contaminate it. I know a lot of the Ontario parks are actually implementing this. So construction in the parks isn't bringing in new invasive plants. And a lot of municipalities are actually putting this into their building tenders as well, and Ministry of Transportations. So that's great. So just a few key notes. What I'm finding is successful programs, locally guided. It's the people that live in the communities, they're long-term, that really care. We can come in and help them with the massive stuff, but once that's gone, it's that little plants that keep growing, and just keeping an eye out on the shorelines and knowing what to look for if there's frag that washes up on the shore. That's what's going to work long-term, and just supporting those local groups, but also to having a plan, with the defined scope, whether it's a municipality or it's a watershed or it's a lake, but just defining the scope of the program and what partners you need to bring to achieve that goal, and where's the Phragmites and what kind of control options do we have, and how much is it cost, and how do we prioritize where we're going to start our control efforts, what's our end goal, where do we want to get to. So yeah, those are all really important things to consider, but this is the most important. If you have Phragmites, don't ignore it, because it's not going to go away. And if it's not a problem now, it's going to be a problem. So the quicker you jump on it, the easier it's going to be to deal with it and even eradicate it, and certainly less costly. And I just like to mention there is another really invasive, very pretty grass starting to spread throughout Ontario. I'm seeing this along 400, a lot of communities now, silvergrass, and I am hoping that whoever is out there controlling Phragmites along the roads also nails this plant. I think it's going to be the next Phragmites. So, if we had known about Phragmites back in the 1970s when it first started, we would have this disaster. So this is when I think we need to pay attention to it as well. So the other thing, I said, it can be very daunting, this kind of work, but what a community builder it can be as well. Like-minded people out there just working together to try and protect these really invaluable systems that we have the privilege to still have in our province. I've thrown a lot of information at you. There are some really valuable places you can go, information sources for you. Ontario Phragmites Working Group, the Invasive Plant Council, Invasive Species Centre, Nature Conservancy of Canada has some great information on their website about Phragmites. The Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative has a lot of information there, a lot of research papers and whatnot. The Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group has a website as well. We can get information, and I certainly don't mind to provide any information if anyone is interested. So I'm just stopping to share my screen there, Karen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Janice. That was great. I'm just going to put up our last slide as we go into the Q&A period. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A now, and then I'll just look through some of what's come in at this point. So one question, anonymous attendee, do you know if the dead decomposing frag and piles of cut material consume large quantities of dissolved oxygen? And does this highlight the need to contain and quickly remove cut material?
So if it's referring to the piles that we make, it's just such a small, usually they're sitting on the shore. The one photo I showed, the lake level rose up, but it's just such a small footprint that that's not even an issue. It's a non-issue, honestly, particularly in the lake. But for in the center of a Phragmites cell, for instance, where you would have like a lot of leaf falling off of the stalks in the fall, and when it senesces and that, utilizing up the oxygen level. I don't think it's any more than our native species would, in times of when the plants are senescing and whatnot. So my inclination would be to say no, it's not a problem. But it's a good question, actually.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we'll be sending out a link to the presentation. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel as well. To Robert, thanks for asking that. There's a question from Emily. Would you send the links you included in a follow-up message? I think if we post the video, the links are active, but we could also work on something to send out. What do you think, Janice?
Yeah, you could, or I tend to just Google, it pops up for me. So
yeah,
for sure, Karen, we can definitely just pull it out of my slide deck.
Yeah, I think the easiest way is to visit some of the websites of these organizations and browse around. They're all posted, they're all accessible, downloaded, or viewable online. So that's another way to quickly find some of the things Janice has mentioned. There is 2 questions about what this new Phragmites grass is called.
Oh, it's not Phragmites grass, sorry. It's a miscanthus, it's silvergrass. Yeah. And I believe it's still sold in the nurseries. I've seen it escape from people's yards into the sides of roads as well. So I think that's kind of how it's got started.
I've seen that too, on the Lake Huron shore. Some miscanthus kind of growing down the bluff and doesn't look great. Well, concerning.
There's a lot of it near Goderich and Lambton Shores and up the 400. Now I'm seeing it go from the roadside ditch back into the forested area. I think it's more like a drier habitat kind of plant, but certainly a problem, I think.
Yeah. Samantha says, great presentation. I was wondering how long after frag is cut can the stems produce clones? If you pile it on site for a year, are you able to safely transport and dispose of it?
Oh, so the one pile I showed there that had dried out by the next summer, we just went and you can manually, if there's any resprouting, you can manually pull it out of that big pile and just lay it on top to dry out. So basically it'll resprout if it can stay moist. So that's it in a nutshell. You just want it to dry out, however you do that. And then for transportation, well, the biggest thing is the seed heads, of course. So if you're transporting cut material that's got seed heads on it, you're gonna have to want to cover it, either somehow tarp it or bag it, or however, depends on how much volume you've got of it, of course. But yeah, and then where are you taking it to? That's another consideration as well.
Okay, thanks. From Greg, thank you, Janice, very informative. You showed that cutting virtually eliminated all Phragmites the following year. Did it come back at all in subsequent years, or are the effects of cutting long lasting?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So that's why I mentioned with the local community. So it's very, very hard to get 100% mortality, but the little regrowth that does come in, if you've got a cane cutter, you can go out and remove it. And so it's just the vigilance of maintaining it. And certainly, if the lake levels are maintained, then you're going to have a good kill. My concern is the lake levels are now starting in the down cycle, the low level cycle. So anything that's surviving in the shallower water, that's going to start to take off. And so that's where having the herbicide Habitat Aqua, that aquatic safe herbicide, is just going to be a game changer for us in that shallower water. Constant vigilance, honestly. But it does help once the massive stuff is gone, to just maintain it. And certainly, I showed you on the Great Lakes, it's going to be a while before we can make sure that we're not having to be vigilant, because it's going to just keep spreading around until you have it all dampened down. That's why I'm so excited about the provincial program.
Okay, from Marilee, hi Janice, excellent as always. love to have the info on how to maintain the still saws for our group. Might it be posted on the website soon?
Yeah, you can go to my website. I have it there as well, but I don't mind. I have a PowerPoint that I give to folks. And that's it. That's an important, I know someone that they didn't maintain it properly and it seized up on them. So yeah, I don't mind to share that information at all.
Okay, from Chris, for herbicide applications, what is the best application timeframe during the growing season? Would it be pre-seed head formation or post? Do you hit it while it's small or wait until it's larger?
Excellent questions. I get that a lot. It's counterintuitive. Those with the farming background want to hit it when it's short and easier to get, and that's kind of not the best time. And this is why I didn't talk about the below ground biomass. You can multiply that by 3 or 4 times what you see above. There's a tremendous amount of roots and rhizomes below the ground. That's what you're trying to kill with the chemical. So the taller the plant, the more leaf surface you have, the more chemical you're going to intercept from spraying to translocate down to the roots to kill them. And so peak biomass, we don't advocate really spraying in June or July, certainly not on hot, humid days because the plants shut down. So if you can wait till those plants are as tall as they are, possibly can be, and spray them then, that's ideal. But into the fall, even if they have a seed head on them, that's when they're starting to translocate. They're really taking a lot of the sun's energy and zooming it down to store the energy in the roots. And so it's going to be absorbing a lot of that product and zipping it down to the roots as well. So the fall for killing frag is the best time to spray, even though it's got that seed head on it. And so, that's where people ask, should we cut it, earlier in the season and then spray it later? I never advocate for that, just because you want to have a lot of leaf surface on the plant. The only thing the cutting will help you with is not being able to develop that seed head. So there's kind of these things you want to balance out in terms of efficacy and how to control it the best way.
Thank you. We have time for a few more, so I'll just keep going. Leonardo asks, are you concerned with development of herbicide resistance? Is there any evidence that this could happen?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and yes, I am. And in fact, in the States, out in Minnesota, and they've had that. And here's the problem: if you're not using the proper concentration of, and this is mostly with the glyphosate, because that's the product I prefer to use, just because there's less harm to mature trees. Imazapyr will kill a mature tree if you're too close to it. So and also with the native the seed bank, it seems it rejuvenates much quicker if you use the glyphosate products. But you want to make sure you're using the right concentration. By that, like if it's back at 5%, or on the label it's 8 liters per hectare, like the max, because you want to kill the trees or the frag. You don't want to make it sick. So if you go to like a Canadian Tire and just get a jug of Roundup to spray the frag, please don't do that. It's really low concentration and you're just going to make it weak and more resistant. So this is how we usually do it. If we have a really large cell that we're spraying with the glyphosate product, Weather Pro, we've gone back. First time we got a great kill, not over 90% mortality, 95% mortality, but there's some survivors. We hit it again. We go back again, and there's still a few survivors. We'll switch over and use the Arsenal power line, because that's the imazapyr. It's a different modality for kill, and that's where we'll eradicate that cell. So you do really want to keep in mind not hitting time and time again with the glyphosate.
Thank you. Greg, another question from Greg. Are native plant seeds typically planted following frag removal, and is that necessary?
Yeah, so in a lot of the systems I work in, if it was a healthy, vibrant, diverse ecosystem before Phragmites came in, once we get rid of the Phragmites, like I said, Mother Nature heals herself. The seed banks there, the native plants come in. So a lot of our sites, we have not had to reseed. Where you would have to, though, is say the wetland or the site was impacted before frag moved in. So maybe you had all canary regress. Guess what's going to come back after you get rid of your frag? So you may have to do another restoration work dealing with that plant, particular invasive grass, and then reseed and help reset the ecosystem. So it really depends on what it was like pre-frag invasion, and also to the vibrancy of the communities, a really close proximity to the area you're treating for seeds to move in.
There's a couple more questions, of 4. So I know we're at noon, but maybe we'll just keep going if you don't mind, Janice.
No problem.
Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
There's 2 actually related, asking about the biomass, how it doesn't break down quickly. Are there nutritional benefits to any species like muskrats?
Oh yeah, so muskrat, it's interesting. So where I'm finding muskrat activity, and I feel bad, like, so they're eking out an existence in the frag, so they'll eat the leaves. And actually, there is good value in the leaves of the plants. And they're using the frag because they don't have cattail, they don't have the preferred species. But so the muskrat will chew on the Phragmites, they'll eat the leaves and whatnot, and they can survive in Phragmites. But again, it's not their preferred plant. But in terms of the break, it's the leaves will break down. It's the stalks. Like if those stalks stay standing, I had one. I was kind of monitoring, and I was into the 5th season. Is this slowly starting to break down a bit? And in fact, in Europe, they use the cane for for thatching on roofs because it just doesn't break down very easily at all. It's quite resistant to the elements, but the leaves will break down fairly quickly.
Well, a question from Heather. Someone mentioned to me that long seed heads should be removed before cutting the plant down, as the disturbance of the plant makes seeds fall into the water, and the plant can then reproduce through seeds as well as rhizomes. Is that something that should be done?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm going to say it depends. I mean, if you're looking at a seed like over a couple of acres of frag, it just seems futile, right? Because what gains you're going to make, particularly if there's all around you there's Phragmites. But if you've got a small patch and that's all you're dealing with, and you can get in there and get it done without too much labor, then sure, why not? Why, but it's just kind of balancing out again the effort that you're going to take and the gains you're going to make for doing what you do. I hope that explains it well. But some of those images, it'd be silly for us to even start to do that. Like, why? What gains are we going to make with the effort, right? In other sites, it would make sense to do that.
3 more questions. To what extent will chemical treatment affect runners and clone production?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I did a little experiment with the coastal, with Jeff Peach of the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation up on Sable Beach years ago. And I injected the stalks. So I had these plots, and I had a little syringe, and I injected the glyphosate directly in the stalk. And what I found was it actually translocated out along the runner, because you could see the stolons. There's actually stolons along the surface of the sand, and it killed them too. So that was kind of neat. So it did translocate out along the stolons. I would say it's about a couple of meters. I've seen stolons though for over 40 meters. I doubt it would translocate that far along. But anyway, there is a little bit of translocation going on there for the rhizomes and stolons.
And then, what is being done to prevent the selling and spread of miscanthus? Anything being done on that?
Well, so I do know, like the Invasive Plant Council, and I'm pretty sure the Invasive Species Center also as well, working with nurseries to try and educate the public and to reduce the selling of plants that are problematic. There is a document called Grow Me Instead, where people can look to see particular plants, the native one versus the invasive or the non-native, to try and maybe steer people towards planting the native plants. There's an excellent book out called Bringing Nature Home that talks about the value of putting native plants in our landscape around our urban centers as opposed to the invasive. And that specifically, I'm not involved in those. Karen, you may know more about that than I do.
I think the one that came to mind for me was the Grow Me Instead program. And just the broad education and outreach that many of the organizations do to help people understand the threat of invasive species. That one is of concern. I don't think there's a huge amount of investment in stopping the selling of it at this point. So I think it comes down to education and helping people make good choices. Last question. So, and this one's a little interesting from Ian. Are there any native wetland species that have at least a small chance competing with invasive frag?
You know what? I haven't seen it in all the years. I've been working like down in Rondo, I don't know if any of you had the, pretty should be down those wetland systems with high diversity of plants. And I've seen the frag there outcompete the buttonbush and the willow, the cattail. I haven't seen any native wetland plants, even non-native, that this plant can't outcompete once it gets established, unfortunately. So that's why humans have to do the control. Like, we can't leave it to Mother Nature. It's not going to happen. In fact, if you go to Europe, where this particular strain of Phragmites is native, it grows monoculture. So even all the checks and balances in the native habitat where, it's developed for millennia, it grows monoculture. So that tells you something.
Definitely does. I've never seen it either. And you always hold out a little bit of hope for the species that are hanging on, and you come back next year and nope. So, okay. Thank you, Janice, for hanging in there with all those questions. And thank you, everyone, for submitting those questions. This has been great. Thanks for attending. And please take a minute to fill out our survey, our post-event survey. And again, a warm thank you to Janice for joining us today and sharing all of this great information on one of the worst aggressive invaders in the Great Lakes. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.